Be honest. When was the last time you told your friends you were too busy to hang out? Well, I hope you're not too busy for today's episode. I'm sitting down with Dr. Jessica B. Stern, and we are talking how you can handle busyness and burnout in your friendships. This is Office Hours, and today we're talking about what to do when friendship starts to feel like a chore. Welcome to this week's episode of Office Hours. And what's so special about today's conversation is that I get to sit down with a real life friend and colleague of my own, someone who I deeply respect, someone who I've known for a number of years, but who, believe it or not, I was just finally able to meet her in person a couple of weeks ago. Today's guest is Dr. Jessica B. Stern. Dr. Jessica is a licensed clinical psychologist, a faculty member at NYU's Langone Health, and a host of Doctor Radio with SiriusXM. She's also the founder of 3 Lemons, a firm that helps people and organizations reduce burnout and build sustainable ways of working. Dr. Jessica, welcome to Office Hours.
Oh my gosh. Thank you so much for having me. I am honored to be here.
I'm so glad that you're here. So we met a number of years back, and I've always had a deep respect, as I said, for you and your area of expertise and your work. We're both really interested in, obviously, clinical psychology, but also knowledge transfer and translation, which is just a jargon-filled way of saying that we like making evidence-based information accessible and engaging and relatable. And so you do that in some really interesting ways. Tell us a little bit about how you do that and how you bring the science of psychology and burnout to people and organizations.
Thank you. Yeah. And I would say that's such an important value, like you said, of both of ours. And I think it's something really special to be able to do is to take information that we've learned through a variety of different platforms, whether it's academically and professionally, whether it's through our own life experiences and anecdotally, and find ways to take that information, that research, that evidence, and to make it relatable, make it reliable for people to understand. And the way that I do it is through a variety of different avenues. One of those is, like you mentioned, I'm a radio host for SiriusXM's Doctor Radio, which is such an exciting way where I get to interact with people, not just in this country, but also in other countries around the world who call in with questions and we have interesting conversations. So that's one way that I do it. I also consult with a variety of different media companies, mental health and wellness companies. For instance, I'm a practitioner for Joy 101, which is Hoda Kotb's wellness company. And it's such an awesome way to really connect with people in a variety of different capacities. I also have my own consulting firm where I do speaking engagements for different companies and agencies and get to really connect with people on the things that are important for them to learn more about. So whether that's burnout or whether that is finding ways to sustainably increase their productivity, whether it's finding ways to balance their different values across the different dimensions of their life, so professionally and personally and relationship-wise and health, etc. And I talk with people through workshops and speaking engagements. And it's just such a nice way to be able to interact with people. So those are a couple examples of the ways that I connect with folks. But it's just such an awesome thing that we get to do. And I love it so much.
Beautifully put. And thank you for the work that you're doing in that space. Yeah, we met, like I said, about 4 years ago when we were both doing some mental health advisory consulting for Wondermind, which is Selena Gomez's a mental fitness company that she had co-founded with Mandy Teefey and Daniela Pearson. And what was interesting to me is that experience of meeting someone virtually, which nowadays is kind of how we meet people so often, personally, professionally, in our friendships and our romantic relationships, and feeling like this is somebody that I connect with so easily and that I can see myself being friends with. And yeah, I'm just so grateful for you and grateful that you are here on Office Hours with us.
I'm so grateful for you too.
It's funny what you do miss, though, when you are connecting with people virtually. Whenever I think about kind of first meetings in person, I'm always reminded of a conversation that I had with a client a number of years back, somebody who I began seeing during the pandemic, which is around the time that I had switched over from in-person therapy to virtual consultations. I mean, there's so much that we can both say on that topic, but overall, the research is pretty clear that actually the efficacy of virtual sessions is certainly well demonstrated, and that while sometimes you do miss that in person energy, there are so many things about connecting online that really lend themselves not only to connection, but to therapy as well. Well, and the other thing, it's an interesting kind of segue into our conversation because the other thing that does work so well for virtual catch ups, whether we're talking about connecting with friends or virtual therapy sessions for that matter, is the practical side of that. Because depending on where you live and where you are traveling to connect with people in person, that travel time factors in, potentially the stresses of parking factors in, right? And so, for people who live busy lives, there is something to making sure that we can find ways to build in moments of connection and that we can find the flow and the frequency of our interactions through virtual sessions, through virtual catch ups. And that is a little bit of what I want to get into with you because you have a really important and unique set of expertise. You really focus a lot on burnout, on feelings of busyness and overwhelm, and how that links up, of course, with well being, but also with productivity and with personal and professional growth and with our relationships. And so I want to get
Mhm.
into this a little bit. And to get us started, I want to talk, frankly, about one of my own trigger words. And it is a word that I repeatedly trigger myself with. And the word is busyness. How many times do we insert that into casual conversation? I wish I used it far less often when people say, "How are you doing?" Sometimes I reflexively find myself answering, "I'm great. I'm so busy." Why do we feel so compelled to respond with this response of, "I'm busy"? There's a lot of talk about how, in some ways it's a little bit of virtue signaling. It's a way to
Mhm.
communicate I'm up to so many interesting things, and that can carry with it all kinds of interpersonal feelings and stresses. Some people wear it as a badge of honor, frankly. But there's
Mhm.
a little bit more to it once we start to unpack it. Sometimes it's a cry for help, right? We want people to ask us follow up questions. We're so busy. Well, what's going on? What's going on in your life? What's keeping you busy? Sometimes, frankly, it is just that reflexive response where we have been, for all sorts of reasons, conditioned to respond in this really surface level way. Sometimes we don't want people asking us follow up questions. And I would also add, sometimes we are just, in fact, busy. I guess my starting question for you is what are your thoughts about busyness and the role that that word plays in conversations with our friends?
I love this question. So I think about this all the time. And if I may, I'm gonna get on my soapbox for a little bit. So
Please.
I I tend to think about it in very much a similar way to what you just described. And I tend to think about it in the context of two primary functions. I think that there's actually many more than two, but two I think are the most common. So I think the first reason is that for a long while, up until at least a couple of years ago, being busy was really glamorized. So there was this concept of the hustle, and you needed to have the hustle. And if you didn't have the hustle, then you didn't have that virtue, or you didn't have that impressive sort of personality trait or resume or anything like that. And so it very much did and does serve that virtue signaling that you were talking about in that badge of honor, where people sort of became used to this as being a concept that they should be proud of and that they should hold themselves to a certain standard of being busy. So I think for a lot of people, subconsciously, whether they mean to or not, and whether they actually believe this or not, the concept of busyness is something that they ingrained in their mind as being something they need to be. Now, it's tricky because people genuinely are busy. So it's not like they're creating this facade of busyness that doesn't actually exist. It's that they're sort of honing into this one capture or this one lens of describing their life. So I think that's one. The second, I think, most common reason, particularly in interpersonal interactions, that this comes up as the word that sort of sums up what you've been up to is that I think it sometimes can be consciously or subconsciously a little bit of sort of an excuse or a reason. The reason I haven't been communicating with you so much is I've been so busy, or the reason I haven't responded to your texts is I'm so busy, Or the reason I haven't reached out to you to make plans is I'm so busy. They might not want to be, like they might have some guilt or some shame about that. Or there could be another, couple of reasons for why they're using that. And again, I don't think this is necessarily something that's intentional. I think it could be something that's happening in the back of our mind, a process that we're not even aware of. But I think a lot of times for people, it's sort of this capture of I'm not as engaged with you or with other things as I would like to be, or as you may want me to be because I'm busy. So I
Hmm.
think that those are sort of two of the most common reasons that I sort of see amongst people when talking about this concept of busyness.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you breaking it down in such a clear way. And that second piece resonates with me personally, again, and professionally. We're communicating so much in what can sound like such a surface level response. One of the strategies that I have found helpful and that I also really encourage people to adopt in their friendships and in their connections is to bring in that specificity. So if you are someone who, like me, yes, is busy, but also tends to lean toward this as a response to casual check ins or moments of questioning, see how you can bring in a little bit of specificity and detail into your reflexive responses. So instead of saying, I'm so busy, take a moment and ask yourself, well, what am I busy with? What am I focusing on these days? What am I working on? What am I prioritizing? What am I enjoying? What am I finding meaning in? What am I struggling with, even? When you can ask yourself that question and respond with even just a moment of realness and a moment of a little bit more specificity and depth, it's really interesting to see how people respond to that and how the conversation can evolve. And frankly, this is also a strategy that we can use with other people, right? When we hear that reflexive response of somebody saying, I'm so busy, take that moment to say, oh, what's keeping you occupied these days? Where's your mind at? What are you thinking about? What are you working on? And I think that those moments can actually become real moments of connection as opposed to just the unraveling of a social script that we all follow. And that can definitely strengthen the conversations and connections that we have.
Absolutely. And I think being able to show that interest is really meaningful because I think a lot of times the word busy, if it's not necessarily a badge of honor, is code word for overwhelmed.
Yes.
And so being able to ask someone what is occupying your space, your time, your energy is you showing that you're interested in this other person and potentially interested in their overwhelm. Maybe you want to help them. Maybe you too are overwhelmed and want to connect with them. And so it can really provide that bridge to that other person. And I think a lot of times people, like you said before, people just respond with this one word because they don't know if it feels safe enough to unpack what their busyness is about or their overwhelm or their burnout or whatever it might be. And you kind of crossing that bridge to meet them where they're at can be such a connecting force that can be
Hmm.
so meaningful.
Yeah. And we're definitely going to get into that piece of it, the overwhelm, the crossing of the bridge, the how do we do that and when do we know that it is safe and how do we invite other people to do that as well. I want to talk a little bit about this whole not only idea or word or label of busyness, but the actual experience of being busy. So, you are in the business of helping people rethink busyness. And I'm certainly in the business of helping people rethink their approach to friendships. So, I guess here's what I'm wondering: why does friendship itself and relationships themselves sometimes feel like another item on our to do list?
It's such an excellent question. And I was having a conversation with a client about this actually a couple of months ago. I think there are a lot of reasons for this, and certainly it depends a little bit on the person and the relationship. But I think some of the factors that it comes down to relate to the investment. So, friendships really are enriched by an investment in time and energy. And sometimes that investment feels a little bit more effortless, and sometimes it feels a little bit more effortful. And depending on where you're at and how much you can both receive and give to the other person might influence how much you feel like you can be able to fulfill that investment. And I was talking to this client a couple months ago who said, I adore my friends. She has amazing friends and amazing friendships. She said, I adore my friends, but I feel really overwhelmed. And I know that I don't necessarily have the space and time right now in my life to be able to listen to them and their struggles in their life in the way that I want to show up for. And it was a really beautiful statement because she was basically saying, I want to be a reliable friend who's emotionally open and emotionally available and can be there for other people. And in this moment of my life, I have so much going on and I'm feeling X, Y, and Z that I don't necessarily have the capacity to be able to listen. And I don't want to just show up and vent and all of that. Now, that's a complicated kind of topic in and of itself because I actually do think that friendship, and I'm so curious about your perspective, is a give and take. And so at any given moment, one person might need a little bit more space than the other. I don't think it always has to be 50-50, so long as it's 50-50 on average. This being said, I thought it was really wise that she was able to say, I can't show up in this way in this moment. On the flip side, though, she also said, I really miss it though. And I really do
Hmm.
miss the benefits of getting that. And so we kind of talked about lower hanging fruit sort of ways that she can engage with her friends that felt a little bit less effortful and still provided her with the benefits of the connection that she was both hoping to receive and hoping to give. And so I think that's one piece. I think another piece for a lot of people too is, especially as we age, we have increased responsibilities and roles in our life. And the ways in which we develop as humans becomes much more variable in our 20s and our 30s. So some people are getting married, some people are having children, some people are going from job promotion, some people are buying houses, and there becomes less of this sort of common blueprint. And so people are diverging much more. And what that means is that there are oftentimes less points of similarity in people's lives with the people that they were previously long-term friends with. And so they tend to have this almost like identity crisis of, I can't necessarily relate to my childhood best friend. And at the same time, I'm connecting with this new friend at work who I have much more in common with, or whatever it may
Yeah.
be. And so I think people are sort of reevaluating the space of the relationships that they're in, and oftentimes feel stuck with how to change the nature of that relationship with the course of their life.
Yeah. We're getting into so many important pieces of this conversation because there certainly is the practical side of busyness and the need to invest in and navigate and manage friendships and all of these social tasks that go into that. And I was just looking at some interesting research a couple of days ago about busyness and how that actually peaks around the age of 30. Although, of course, there's variability here, but I think this really speaks to this developmental period that you're talking about, where people's lives are becoming busier and they're becoming busy in different ways. And so there's that emotional component of, oh, I feel like I'm maybe growing apart from my friends or that our lives are diverging or trajectories are diverging in some way. But there's also the practical component of that, that your busy seasons may be different. If you are working as an accountant, tax season's really busy for you. If you are a parent, then it's back to school season that is causing you a lot of feelings of overwhelm. And of course, we don't only have one role in life. And so the ways that these
Mhm.
kind of blend together to create our own unique seasons of busyness don't always match up with our friends. And that can also make it really challenging to feel connected, to stay connected. It's interesting to hear you share that example too, because you're kind of alluding to one of the things that I often talk about, which is I hear all the time, Miriam, I'm not good at making friends, or I was struggling to maintain friendships. And while that type of self awareness and introspection is so helpful and such an important starting point, the advice that I often give is to, again, get a little bit more specific, that we know that making friends is a constellation of so many different skills and interpersonal experiences. And the same is true, obviously, for maintaining our friendships in busy seasons. And there will be parts of that that we struggle with more. So, your story about your client, right? And feeling as though it's hard to open up and hard to share or hard to show up for our friends and be there in the way that they really want. Those themselves are different skills. There's also the piece of just reaching out and having casual check-ins and sending memes and responding to text messages, right? And so all of that goes into the cycle of friendship maintenance, that to say I'm bad at this or I'm struggling at this, that may be an interesting starting point, but it's far more helpful to get specific and to think about, well, what are the pieces of this that I am finding challenging, that I am finding overwhelming, that I feel as though I am too busy for? Because then you can start to question, well, what do I want to do about that? What can I do about that? Or you can also pivot and say, okay, this is one thing that's really hard for me. Maybe it is hard for me to show up for my friends and have kind of the emotional bandwidth to be present and be supportive. But maybe I do have the capacity right now to be that initiator and to send a quick message, a couple times a week and just say, I'm thinking of you. Here's a photo or a meme that reminded me of you. And those moments too are really helpful for maintaining that sense of closeness. I want to be very specific here about this piece of not responding to text messages. And I may or may not be asking for a friend, a very close personal friend in this moment. Why do you think it is that those very easy tasks, in a way, and I'm doing air quotes here, right? Easy, that this low hanging fruit, why do those become the things that can sometimes feel so overwhelming? Why is it so challenging in moments when we're busy or feeling overwhelmed to just send that reply, to just do the thing? What is it that actually stops us from taking action?
Oftentimes, we attach so much to small tasks that we are so not even aware of. And sometimes it's real practical sort of considerations or factors, and sometimes it's ones that we're maybe extrapolating a little bit on. So I can give you a couple of examples because I hear this all the time.
Please do.
Yes. So oftentimes it looks like a simple text, but actually requires a little bit more planning or a little bit more thought or a little bit more organization. And I am feeling a lot of friction in my mind with all of that. And so I'm not going to respond to this text right now. And then I'm going to let it build up in my queue. That's one piece. Another piece is the emotional component behind it, guilt and shame. I haven't responded before. I didn't show up to the last party. I'm afraid that X, Y, or Z is going to sort of excommunicate me because I am a poor texter. And then what ends up happening is that guilt and shame compounds and makes it even harder to do the thing that you feel guilty about not doing, which feels paradoxical, but is actually a very common thing. So I oftentimes will have people say, I didn't respond for so long, it's too late. I can't respond now. And then that person sending a second unrelated text, and they're like, oh, but I didn't respond to the previous text. I can't respond to this one because then I have to address that one. And so then this sort of almost like snowball effect accumulates where people really start to build on themselves a lot of pressure, oftentimes associated with guilt or shame. And I think those are the two primary ones, but there are a lot of other ones related to logistics or fear or self-confidence. This is a big one too. A lot of people don't realize that there's a lot of self-esteem that can play into this, even very small, subtle ways. And just being able to do things that can really sort of inject you and your personality can be really meaningful and also can sometimes be really challenging, especially if you're feeling insecure, you're feeling nervous or anxious or whatever it might be. And so we look at these tasks that in theory are actually quite small or low hanging fruit. And we oftentimes will build a mountain out of them behind the
Mhm.
scenes. And it can feel just really challenging, especially if you haven't responded to a lot of texts. And then you're going back and you're like, I have to catch up on all the texts. It's not just one tiny small text, it's like 20 to 100 tiny small texts or whatever it might be. And so then it feels even more overwhelming. This being said, being able to chip away at that, as you and I both know, can be so, so, so powerful.
Yes. So powerful, so freeing. And I love the way that you always kind of validate the realness of the experience that people are having in terms of that sense of overwhelm that is present, and also help us all to chip away at some of the narratives that we have about what those actions or that feeling of overwhelm really means. And for everyone listening, I want you to know that we are absolutely going to end off this conversation by talking about some very concrete steps that you can take to chip away at that sense of overwhelm, to prioritize your friendships, even when you're feeling that sense of busyness in your life. But I do want to take a moment here. You used the word mountain just a moment ago.
Mm,
And I want to talk about the busyness to burnout pipeline, because
mhm.
one of the things that I have certainly seen uh, is that it is hard to see that unfolding in front of you. That very often, when we are in a busy season of life, we have this mentality of, I just need to push through. I just need to keep going, to work hard, to keep my head down, to put one foot in front of the other, to continue saying yes. sometimes out of necessity, sometimes out of felt pressure, sometimes out of excitement about the opportunities and experiences that are coming your way. But for one reason or another, those yeses, those commitments, those tasks, that process ends up leading you down a path where you not only feel busy and you not only feel overwhelmed, you start to feel that sense of burnout. And sometimes once you realize that you are there, it in fact feels as though it is too late. And so, can we shift right now and talk a little bit about burnout? Because I also think that is one of those words that just gets thrown around and people don't necessarily recognize it when it's there. We also don't necessarily take the time to question, well, what is burnout? What does that really feel like? What does that look like? What does that mean?
Absolutely. So, burnout is essentially the experience in which you are depleted of energy. And it has these ramifications both on your mental health and oftentimes on your physical health that can look like things like difficulty sleeping or too much sleep, feeling a lack of enjoyment from things that are either important to you or things that you need to do, feeling a lack of energy or motivation, perhaps feeling disconnected from other people around you, which obviously very much directly connects to this conversation here about friendships and relationships. And it oftentimes can look like, especially in the workplace, it oftentimes can look like feeling a sense of apathy. So feeling like there's a lack of importance or that a lack of caring, even if you actually do care at your core, it's just hard to sort of access that care. And so it is this experience essentially, the way I think about it is it's depletion. So you
Hmm.
are feeling depleted. And we think about burnout in a couple of different capacities. One is in the sort of employment capacity where you feel burnt out in your job. However, more and more people are noticing that they're feeling burnt out in life.
Yes.
So it's perhaps not directly sort of contained within their job, but it's actually something that feels a little bit more diffuse. And this is a little bit different than how we had previously understood burnout to be. Previously, burnout was studied pretty much purely in a professional capacity. And so we would think about it in the context of your job. And that's where a lot of the early research on burnout was. However, now we're understanding that it can be much more diffuse, much more fluid, which also makes it a little bit more slimy in the sense that it's a little bit harder to see, to notice. It creeps up in our life in a lot more ways. And exactly like you're saying, oftentimes we only notice it once it's become pretty significant, which doesn't mean it's not irreversible, but you're oftentimes already a little bit stuck in the weeds by the time you're noticing it. And that can feel a little bit daunting for people.
One of the things that I find helpful when trying to access certain feelings or experiences or trying to gauge, is this something that I'm struggling with or not? Is this something that I am experiencing, have experienced? How can I think about this in a way that will prepare me for the future? Is to break it down into those different categories. And you touched on some of these, right? To think about, sure, the feelings that you have, but also some of the thought patterns that you have, and also some of the behaviors that we tend to endorse or refrain from when we're in that place of burnout or apathy, even. Help us understand, especially that last piece, some of the interpersonal component here. What might we notice in ourselves if we are in that space of burnout in terms of how we interact with other people, not only how we feel inside?
I would say probably the most common one that I think is quite relatable for people is feeling irritable, feeling a little bit more likely to be snappy with other people, feeling like it's a little bit harder to either tolerate frustration or maybe deal with some of the things about interpersonal relationships that might rub you the wrong way in ways that you otherwise would have been kind of okay to ride that wave around. So I'd say that's a big one. Another one is feeling a sense of emptiness. And it doesn't have to be this like deep existential emptiness, but perhaps you're sitting in a group of people that you typically enjoy spending time with, or maybe you're with your best friend or your partner, and you're just finding that your mind is a little bit drifty. You're finding that you're not necessarily feeling that sense of joy or meaning from that interaction. And that doesn't mean that every interaction needs to have meaning and joy. So we don't necessarily want to fall into a standard that is unattainable at every single instance. This being said, if you're noticing a pattern where it's just harder to connect with other people and you're not necessarily feeling as fulfilled from an interaction you otherwise would have felt fulfilled by, I think that's a big one. And I'd say the other sort of the third one that comes to my mind the most is finding that you are sort of isolating a lot more. You're avoiding social interactions a lot more than you otherwise would. You are feeling, again, that sense of depletion is really holding you back from things that you think you would potentially find joy or derived benefit from otherwise.
Mhm. I want to make sure that we talk about the other side of this too, because it's one thing to take the time to check in with ourselves and be self reflective and think about what am I experiencing and how am I showing up in the world and showing up in my relationships. It's another experience when you are on the receiving end of this. So when you are in a friendship where you are connecting with someone who is either displaying their busyness in a way that feels off-putting or in a way that is a true barrier to actually connecting, to finding the time to share experiences together, to finding the time to connect in a meaningful way, to even have those quick catch-ups virtually or in a text. And so I'm wondering, what are your thoughts on how we can not only understand what's going on there when we're connecting with a friend who is busy and overwhelmed and maybe even burnt out, but how we can navigate through those situations? How do we find that right balance between showing up for others, showing up for our friendship, continuing to put in the work while also staying true and grounded in our own experience, where we are feeling perhaps as though we're not a priority and we have that sense of longing for more connection, or maybe even we're worried about a friend. So help us understand that dynamic and that side of the experience.
This is so tricky, I think, for a variety of reasons. But the main reason that I think that this can be a little bit of a delicate balance is there's this sort of question about needs that I think about a lot is what do you need and what does your friend need? And the struggle with burnout is that oftentimes our friends who are burnt out might not know A, that they're burnt out yet, and B, what their needs are in that moment. And that makes it trickier because we don't necessarily know how to respect our friends' needs because we don't know if it's avoidance. We don't know if this is something that they're asking for. And so there's this sort of space that we're in, oftentimes in these scenarios where we're trying to navigate, is this something that they even are aware of is happening? And
Mm.
so you want to be able to be respectful to their experience and also respectful to your own needs. And so if you're really missing your friend, right, that's a need of yours. And so how can you honor both individuals' needs at the same time, especially if they potentially conflict in this
Yeah.
particular moment or season of your life? And so I think the first step is sort of opening up that dialogue to get a sense of A, what is their understanding or their sort of perspective on what is potentially happening between the two of you, either for that particular moment or even more chronically. And then what do they need in that moment? And what do you need? And how is there a compromise that potentially can be arrived at?
I really appreciate you bringing in this language about needs, because actually it's reminding me of a little bit of the research that I've done in the past on friendship, where we looked at the most important and most challenging and frankly most consequential friendship situations and challenges, meaning these are the ones that are showing up most often, where if you don't say or do the right thing, there will be consequences, either for your well-being or for your friendship. That this could be the end of a friendship in some cases, or it could be the start of the gradual growing apart. And as part of that research, I'm taking you on a little bit of a journey here, so stick with me. As part of that research, we were not only identifying the specific situations that come up, but also the different types of situations that come up. And what was really interesting in this work is that some of those situations were transgressions, where one friend has said or done something that inherently violates a core expectation and function of friendship. And whether that's done on purpose or not is almost irrelevant. I mean, that might have consequences for how you handle that situation, the kinds of conversations that you have, but it could still be considered a transgression. And so obviously, we tend to think of those transgressions as being major betrayals or violations of trust, but there are also all sorts of transgressions related to reliability in terms of friends showing up when they say that they will, respecting plans and not canceling at the very last minute for no reason, showing up on time, especially when you've shared that that's something that's important to you and that that's what helps you to feel valued in that relationship. And so there are the transgression situations, but there are also conflict situations. And those are actually different. Conflict situations, to me, sounds a lot like what you're describing. Those are interpersonal moments where there is just a difference of needs. It isn't that one friend has said or done something inherently wrong. It's just that there's a mismatch and a moment of tension in terms of what I need and what my friend says that they need. I might need a little bit of space because I'm feeling overwhelmed, and my friend is at a period or a moment in life where they need a little bit more closeness. And so, how does that conflict and how does that create tension? And so, I think that this language of needs is so helpful because it can potentially clue us into, well, what are my needs? What might my friends' needs be? And how can we start to have the conversations about that will allow us to navigate that situation with more compassion and more clarity, frankly?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that mismatch is where so much of this lives. And that's where I think oftentimes people see it as, abandonment or neglect or a lack of care or whatever it might be. And it truly might not be that at all. It might be that one friend seriously just genuinely doesn't have the capacity for X, Y, or Z at any given point or at this particular season or moment of their life or their friendship. And that it's nothing personal to the other friend. It's just that they have limited bandwidth and their bandwidth is going towards something that's either more urgent or maybe in this particular moment a little bit more important. And I think that that can be sometimes a little bit hard to stomach as the friend on the receiving end. And just to validate that, that can feel really crummy. It can feel isolating. And sometimes I think it can even feel confusing too, especially if you don't know what's going on. And this moment can really be a nice moment to open up that dialogue again, to be able to sort of understand what is the mismatch so that way the two of you can more meaningfully address or respond to it.
Yeah. I know you do a lot of work with couples and run a lot of workshops for couples across the board. And so I'm wondering, are there lessons that we can take from that work and apply that to our friendships in situations, for example, where one friend just is busier or is going through a season of a little bit more overwhelm? Or maybe, as we said before, you are both busy just at different times or in moments that conflict. What can we learn from the way that couples have navigated some of those moments?
I think it comes down to the kind of boring answer, which is compromise. But I think the more fun way to arrive at compromise is creativity.
Mm.
So finding, and this is something that you're really strong at in your work, is finding creative ways to compromise around a goal or a need. So
Tell me more. I'm locked in. What does this mean?
I love that. If one friend is like, "Hey, I really miss you and I really want to connect with you more," and the other friend's like, "Yeah, dude, I miss you too. And like my kids are sick every other week and I feel like I'm drowning at my job and X, Y, or Z, and I just like don't have the time to either meet you for coffee or Pilates or to hop on a phone call or whatever it might be." Is there a way, a creative way where both friends' needs are met? So for instance, You, let's say, find a way to spend time together while you're getting things done. Something, a new idea that's popped up, and I can't take credit for it, but I'm definitely going to run with it. And I saw this on Instagram, and I don't know who actually created it. So one of them is an admin hangout. I love this concept so much because it basically takes two different sort of ways of spending your time and brings them together. So
Yes.
one is accomplishing tasks and the other one is spending time with the people that you enjoy. And so
Yes.
the idea here is, let's say you have a group of friends, you maybe have some fun, different kind of brunch foods or whatever it may be, a good sort of jazz playlist, and everybody's doing their thing, but they're doing their thing together. And I think this relies a lot on the concept of body doubling as well. And it provides an opportunity for people to have that sense of accountability and all X, Y, or Z. But even outside of the body doubling, which kind of serves a little bit of a different function, is this is just an opportunity for you to connect with your friends when you literally just don't have the capacity or the time to do so.
Yes.
Um, and I love that idea so much.
I do too. Not only because my list of tasks that I need to accomplish is again growing by the day, and it feels overwhelming. And wouldn't it be nice to be able to chip away at that in a social capacity? But it really does tie in this whole strategy that I talked about that I know you have your own language for as well, which is the idea of stacking. That so often we are in a place of multitasking where we feel like we just have to be doing everything everywhere all at once. And the challenge with multitasking is it divides our attention and it actually contributes to more feelings of overwhelm. And our attention is split in a way that not only feels kind of crappy, it can often result in less productivity and we leave those experiences feeling more depleted. Stacking is a little different because of the intentionality that we bring into it, and it's the experience of combining an already scheduled moment in our week or an item or task on our to-do list with the experience of social connection. And what happens then is not only are we able to get that sense of accomplishment and cross things off, and who doesn't love that feeling, we can also prioritize connection in a way that otherwise might not feel all that doable. And it then makes that experience just far more meaningful. And so the idea of planning an admin night or brunch, or frankly, combining our weekly walk with a catch up with friends. I share this all the time in some of the keynotes that I give. For me, one of my stackable moments of my week is after carpool. When I've dropped my kids off in the morning, I'll call my very best friend, Alana, and that's our time to connect because not only is it a regularly occurring moment in my week, and I know I have those, whatever it is, 10, 15, 20 minutes to connect, there's also an element of protection that it confers because I can suffer from road rage in the morning with Montreal traffic. And when I'm talking with her, I end up feeling a little bit more grounded and calm and settled. And so it just makes that moment in my daily life and agenda that would otherwise feel like a stressful moment or as I'm waiting for the next moment, it ends up feeling like this is a connection filled moment. And doesn't that feel good? And doesn't that feel sustainable? So I love your idea of bringing in creativity, finding those stackable moments, hosting an admin night. I want to obviously, as we kind of wrap up our conversation, talking about the idea and the experience of feeling overwhelmed. I would imagine that when you're in that place of feeling overwhelmed, it can also feel overwhelming about, well, what do I actually do when I'm in that space? So I want to make sure that we give everyone who's listening some of those other practical strategies, whether it's tips, whether it's conversation starters, whether it's frankly, apps and platforms and tools to use to help us feel organized and on top of things. You talk a lot about being better, not busier. How can we be better, not busier, when it comes to all of the tasks and experiences that go into maintaining relationships and friendships?
Absolutely. So the way that I think about productivity in general, and I'll just keep this brief so that way I can connect it to this point, is that ultimately the ideal is to have our time and our energy align with our values. So the things that are important to us. And when it comes to relationships and friendships, part of the struggle is that there are other things in our life, roles, responsibilities, whatever it might be, that are perhaps either more urgent or that are put upon us by other people in our life, whether it's our bosses or managers, or whether it's, family or whatever it might be, that then kind of circumvent some of that time and energy and then pull it away from our friendships. And so, what you want to be able to do is kind of redirect the energy in the ways that feel most applicable to your values in the way that is most possible. Because it's not entirely possible to map your ideal with what is currently happening. So, what that looks like is, let's say you are not necessarily spending as much time with your friends, or you're not catching up with them as much, is to figure out, is there a way that I can sort of pull time and energy from another use that I'm using it for elsewhere in my life, and sort of almost reapply that to the friendship and relationship domain of my life. So, as an example, is, let's say, so I love to go for long walks in the park, either before work or after work. And for a long time, I would just sort of either listen to podcasts on those walks, or I would listen to music. But then what I started doing is I actually started using those walks, similar to your drive in Montreal, is to be able to either call friends, or if it was either too early for them or they were at work or whatever it might be, is to send voice notes. And so that was actually my time where I would send voice notes to my best friend, Nina. I'd send her these really long voice notes and be like, yo, here's the story, here's what's happening. And it's just a nice way to be able to use time that I have and sort of stack it with something else that is important to me. So I think being able to sort of audit your time and your energy, almost as if you would audit your money and say, okay, I have X amount of money in savings. This is a goal that I have that is being sort of unmet, or need that's being unmet. Perhaps can I funnel some of my savings from this place to this place instead? And so it doesn't necessarily feel like restriction, because you're actually filling something that is really important to you. And so being able to kind of sort of reassess where that time and that energy is going, and again, sort of redirect it in a way that might be quite meaningful for you.
Hmm. I love that. It's such a practical way that we can not only prioritize checking in with friends, but prioritize connection as a whole, and to do so in a much more intentional and value aligned way. I'm also wondering about the mindset piece of this all. We talked a little bit before about how we assign so much meaning to words, to labels, to interactions, whether it's our own behavior or someone else's. And so, for someone who's struggling with this, regardless of what end they're on, maybe they're feeling overwhelmed and they're feeling busy and they aren't able to invest in their friendships in the way that they want to, or maybe they're feeling as though their friend isn't able to show up for them in the way that they are used to, or expect, or hope. What can we be thinking about in terms of how we should be thinking, not only about busyness, but also about the role that other people play in our lives? How can we tackle some of the shame that you have spoken about, some of the guilt, some of those complicated feelings that show up? What's the story that we should be telling?
Yeah. Well, I think the first step is to see, what is the story that you're already telling. So, to sort of catch what type of narrative is already playing in your mind space, so that way you can see where that needs to be rejigged a little bit. Because if the current story that you're telling is embedded with guilt and shame and self criticism, that's your red flag there. That is an indicator, hey, I'm talking to myself in not such a nice way, or I'm making a lot of assumptions about the fact that my friend doesn't like me anymore, or whatever it might be. And so, again, kind of similar to auditing your time and your energy, is also to audit the tracks that are playing in your mind. And then from there, kind of reassess the narrative and say, is this narrative A, one that is accurate, and or B, one that's helpful?
Hmm.
Right? Because it might be to a certain extent accurate, especially if you say, my best friend's really busy these days and doesn't have time for me. Perhaps that's accurate. But if you're stuck in that narrative, it's not necessarily so useful. And so,
Hmm.
is there a way that you can shift it towards something else and say, my best friend's busy in this season of life, in this phase, and perhaps this is a nice opportunity for me to invest in another friendship that I either haven't invested in, or is a little bit newer to me, or maybe invest that time and energy in new activities. Then it gives you a little bit of a redirection course that can be just really productive and really helpful for you.
Yes, I love that. That is so helpful. And again, I wholeheartedly notice and appreciate how you've brought back that idea of specificity into this in terms of how we are storytelling and making sense of our experiences. That there's a big difference between saying, my friend isn't showing up for me or isn't available in the way that I would like or that I'm used to, and they're not interested in me, or our friendship's not a priority, versus this isn't a priority right now or in this season of life. Or maybe it is a priority, but it's difficult to put that into practice. And so I think that sometimes it's a matter of doing a bit of an overhaul on our narratives and storytelling. And sometimes it's just these small little tweaks that can make a situation not only more tolerable, but can actually inspire us and encourage us to then have a conversation with our friends about what we're noticing and to come up with some of those creative solutions that you have shared with us today. So thank you for doing that. And also, I would be remiss if I did not give you credit for your very catchy and alliterative way of summarizing this whole process, the catch it, check it, change it framework that you talk a lot about. I remember you shared that. And of course, that whole idea of cognitive reframing is something that we do all the time in our practice as therapists. So without getting too jargony again about it, I just think this is such a great way. So can you walk people through just in one sentence what the catch it, check it, change it framework really involves?
Absolutely. So catch a thought that you're having, check the thought to see if it's A, helpful, and B, if it's accurate, and kind of keep an eye on its tone a little bit. And then if it doesn't feel helpful and or accurate, to change it to a version that feels a little bit more helpful and or accurate. We're not aiming for positive toxicity here. We're just trying to have a little bit of a more grounded and realistic front for us to surf life through.
Amazing. And so, speaking of catching it and checking it and changing it, if you could shift, if you could catch, check, and change just one belief or myth, perhaps, that people have about busyness and burnout, what would that be?
That's such a great question. I have 1,000, but I would say a lot of it comes down to sort of the value and identity, and sometimes even perfectionism, which is a whole nother topic that
Yes, it
comes
is.
about in this. Is to really just find the ways in which you hold on to guilt, or hold on to shame, or hold on to this sort of necessary value that you're attaching your busyness and your productivity to. And instead to kind of reframe it as something that you aspire to. So instead of saying things like, I have to do X, Y, or Z, say, I want to, or this is necessary for me at this particular time. So drop the shoulds, maybe also drop the coulds too, and instead figure out, why is this important to you?
Dr. Jess, before we end, we always like to cap off our episodes of Office Hours with a tangible takeaway, a next connection step, if you will. So, if you were to ask our listeners to go off and do one thing after listening to our conversation, what is their next connection step? What are you prescribing in terms of an actual moment of connection? What can people go off and do to strengthen their friendships and to work through some of those feelings of busyness?
I would say go out there and say yes to what you want to and say no to what you don't. So go ahead and send that text that you're nervous to send, book the class, make the plans. And if there's something that you feel pressured to do that you don't have to and that doesn't align and is going to take energy and time away from the things you do want to do, say no.
Fantastic. And if people's next connection step is that they want to connect with you more, where can they find out more about you and the amazing work that you're doing?
Absolutely. They can check out my website, drjessicabstern.com, or they can find me on Instagram at drjessicabstern.
Amazing. Thank you. There were so many helpful moments in my conversation with Dr. Jessica Stern. What stood out most to me was this: it's not always a matter of time or energy or even capacity that keeps us stuck in cycles of busyness and overwhelm. It's also the stories that we tell ourselves. And I know for me, when I'm feeling behind or when I'm working to catch up on messages, the feelings of guilt or even shame that creep in, That's exactly what keeps me stuck and leads me down that path of avoidance. My conversation with Dr. Jessica absolutely helped me to better understand these feelings and, frankly, to let go of some of the shame that I've been holding on to and to recognize that breaking it down into smaller tasks, that's often the best way to scale that mountain. If I'm being honest, the idea that signaling busyness isn't always a flex, it can also be a justification or even an apology in some ways. That's also something that I'm sitting with and working to unpack still. I always, though, appreciate how Dr. Jessica breaks down these ideas with such compassion and how she gave us all helpful tools, not only for managing those feelings of overwhelm, but also for finding creative solutions. Here are just a few of the concrete takeaways and strategies that we covered in our conversation today. Number one, be specific. Bringing in that specificity is a helpful way to break the busyness trap and a better way to have better conversations with our friends. The next time that you feel compelled to share how busy you are, ask yourself this: how are you spending your time these days? What are you passionate about or excited by? What's really going on in your mind? And when a friend shares how busy they are, you can always follow it up with, hey, I'd love to hear more about what's on your plate or even on your mind. Two, practice stacking. Combine social connection with an already scheduled activity that's on your agenda or a task on your to do list. I love how Jess brought creativity into the mix, thinking about themed evenings like admin or admin night, going for walks or connecting with friends on your morning commute, or even pairing up with a friend to pursue a creative outlet or hobby. Take a painting class together, do an improv class, join a choir. Number three, get clear on your storytelling. Ask yourself, what is the story that I'm telling myself about what busyness and overwhelm really mean? This is especially helpful when a friend tells you that they are so busy. Do you interpret that as a sign that they are uninterested in hanging out? From there, you can start to catch it, check it, and change it. You can start to ask yourself questions like, how true is this? What evidence do I have to support that they're not interested in me or no longer interested in prioritizing our friendship? You can also ask yourself, how helpful is this really? Here's the other thing I've been thinking about since our conversation. We have made so much progress in working to undo hustle culture and to recognize that it doesn't feel good to showcase your busyness or to be on the receiving end of that. To understand that busy isn't better, and that if we keep putting off connection in the name of everything else on our to do list or in the name of overwhelm, even, that the right time, the right opportunity, the perfect time and opportunity might not present itself. But here's the question: when are we giving ourselves permission to not be busier or even better, but just to be? So here's my friendly reminder from today's office hour. Yes, you may in fact be busy. Chances are you probably are. But the solution cannot be to be more productive about managing your busyness. Sometimes we need to recognize that we are in a situation or even a season of life or a season of friendship where the best thing that we can do is to say no or not right now, to say no to optimizing, no to an attempt to carve out even more time, to recognize that not only is it okay to say no, that sometimes it's the very thing that helps us protect ourselves and our friendships long term. This isn't always possible, I get that. But when we can be honest with ourselves and with our friends about our capacity and to be upfront about where we're at, it can help us step off that hamster wheel, off the busyness to burnout pipeline, and take our next connection step toward feeling refueled, recharged, and ready to connect with what and who really matter. And that, my friends, was Office Hours. I'm so glad that we got to share this time together, and I hope that our conversation today will inspire you to invest in your friendships and the people who matter most. I'll be right back here with you next week for another episode of Two Peas on a Pod. In the meantime, let's stay connected. Follow the show on your favorite podcast platform. Connect with me at the Two Peas on a Pod and at Miriam Kermeyer across social channels. And of course, make sure you share today's episode with a friend. And let them know that you are most definitely not too busy to be thinking of them. Until our next catch up, take care of yourself and the people in your pod. I'll see you back here next week. Two Peas on a Pod is hosted by Dr. Miriam Kermeyer. Executive produced by Zoe Travis, Matthew Hoffman, Katya Kaminsky, and Dr. Miriam Kermeyer. Produced and edited by Podcast Nation. Producers Madison Britt and Alicia Paneer. Audio engineer Miles Carter. Original music by Sarah Walk. Created by Zoe Travis and Matthew Hoffman. Two Peas on a Pod is recorded in Montreal and Los Angeles. Today's program contains information that is for educational and entertainment purposes only. This program is not a substitute for psychological or medical advice. Please seek out your own support and research as needed. Take care, friends.